Guys, welcome to our fifth, right? I think it's our fifth Zoom chat and chill. And today we have Mark Greek with us. And Mark, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your current role.
Sure. I'm Mark Greek. I am the Archival Collections Coordinator for the DC Public Library. The name of our division is called the People's Archive, previously known as Special Collections. The library wanted a new name with the renovation of our central library, so they came up with the People's Archive. So my job is I oversee all of the archival collections and the archival process. So from working with the donor all the way through the processing and making it available to the researcher. Once that portion is done, everything's turned over to the reference team, and the reference team handles it from there. So I handle all back end stuff with the collections. So it's a lot of different steps, but yeah, I handle a lot of different things.
If you want to tell us a little bit about your journey to the position that you have, do you have an MLIS, or what is your degree in?
Okay, so I consider myself a traditional archivist, and by that meaning I come out of history and not library science. So I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Pittsburgh, where I majored in history, American history. And then I got my master's degree from the University of South Carolina, also in history, studying the American Civil War. From there, my wife, who was also works in a similar field to me, but she has an MLIS, so she's more librarian than I am. She got a job at the Library of Congress, and I sort of followed her to DC. And from there, I got a job as a processing archivist at the DC Public Library on a 2-year grant. And I turned that 2-year grant into a full-time position by working there. So, and all my archival training comes from my time as a graduate student working in the archive. I did not take the track of being a TA, working with students and directly teaching, although that's where I thought my career was going to go. I spent more time working in the archives and processing collections, and I worked on 2 different collections there. The papers of General William C. Westmoreland, who was the commanding general during the Vietnam War. And I also worked with the library's photograph collection and cataloging them, identifying down to like photographic type and all kinds of things. That experience led me to get the job that I have, or I got with the library, and then that they liked the work I was doing so much that they turned it into a full-time position. And from there, I steadily moved through the division, sort of creating a path as I went. When I was hired, I was the 2nd archivist to be hired. We now have 3 traditional archivists and 2 digital archivists. So our archival function has grown as the library has understood more and more about the process and what is needed from what the archival community can offer the public library and our collections. So it's not the traditional way of getting into the job, but it was getting your foot in the door and then sort of making yourself valuable to the organization and help, and to my supervisor, and she really advocated for me and made it into a full-time position.
So you were, so as you said, non-traditional, so you were more hands-on, and then you took that hands-on and just made, forged your own way. So I guess a more traditional archivist would be if you majored in archives or took that track.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, where the education is today, you'd either be a public history student, or where you have like a degree in where your archives is in public history, or public history program, or in the library program. So you get more training that way. My training, since I'm more scholarly based, being a historian, my work in archives was all done by, sort of apprenticeship, for lack of a better term. I went in and I learned from the people around me And then to make myself more marketable, I went ahead and took the certified archivist exam and studied for that and learned all theory at that point, because the exam is more theory than it is practicality. It's written for how archives work in the book world, not how archives work in the real world, which there's a very clear difference between those two things. Because if you've gone around and toured other archives, you know, no archives does anything identically. We all sort of do our own thing, that they're all very similar in nature, but how the exact process is done is often very different.
Christy, I don't know if you wanted to ask your question or if you wanted me to read it.
I can ask it myself. I was just curious, since you come from a history background, do you do any scholarly research within your archives? Like, do you speak or present or write papers on, or even blog posts about its contents? Or like, are you involved in any of the sort of publicizing aspect, or for your own interests, like anything like that?
Yeah, the job does allow me to do that. So I presented at SAA, and we have a local history conference here in DC, and I'm on the planning committee for that. I've been on that committee for 10 years. So I help, and that really gets me connected into the scholarship and really help connect those that are actively writing to what I have to offer them as their next potential collection or thing to write about. So I have done that. I've written an article for a magazine, and I've written, my wife calls it a book, I call it a picture book. It's like it's a History Press is the publisher. It's sort of like Arcadia. It's a lot of photos, except I was able to do a non-traditional way of doing their book. So my captions are paragraphs rather than sentences, if that makes sense. And my chapter entries are really detailed. And what it looks at is civil rights movement in DC, as well as the movement in DC for statehood or home rule, depending on what time period you're looking at, and how the two sort of the people that drove for home rule, what eventually becomes home rule in DC, really learned from their activism in the civil rights movement. So I was able to connect those two things and show how the people of DC really learned, because of everybody comes to DC to protest something. You can't have that with anything. I mean, our collections are very activist driven. So it's just sort of the nature of the city. And so I was able to connect those two things and really get people to understand that home rule was not a new idea. They've been thinking about what to do with the people of the district since, you know, I always like my Hamilton reference here, from In the Room Where It Happened, when they said, we're going to give you this land and create this thing called the District of Columbia, or what will become the District of Columbia. What do you do with the people who live there? They've been debating that really since the inception of the Constitution. And so it's not a new thing, but home rule doesn't really get realized by the citizens, or they don't gain anything until the 1970s. So it's really that education they get in the civil rights movement that they apply, and then able to actively activate for themselves, or, you know, advocate for themselves and get some semblance of home rule, meaning they can elect their own mayor, they can have a school board, they can collect their own taxes, they can do a lot of different things. There's still congressional oversight. The DC is a very weird place, but they were able to do a lot of different things, and they got representation in Congress. They were able to vote for president of the United States, which before for the 150 years prior, they were never able to do. So I was able to connect those two different things. Lately, I've been interested in the library's sort of founding and looking at the story of how the public library in DC came about. It's an interesting story. No one's ever written a scholarly book on the DC Public Library. We're a big, a large urban library. Most of the urban libraries have some sort of history written of them. Our library does not. So the founding story is interesting because there's a large debate in DC where, as some people would think, well, you got the Library of Congress, why do you need a public library? And that was the debate they were having in the newspapers. And it's a very interesting story, and how the editor of one of the papers really took it to cause to develop a public library. And there was a man who's more noted for his polar explorations, Horace Greeley, who got tired of waiting for Congress to finally decide whether we could have a library or not, and just built his own. And it's very fascinating, like that these people just like opened up a living room and put books in it and like checked them out to the people. And that happened all over the city. There were all these little small private libraries that were able to do that. But when the public library came in and it was free, all the subscription libraries sort of went away. But it was a very interesting time period, I think. And I think there's a story there. I just haven't flushed it all completely out.
I just briefly read an article about the origins of libraries, and so my background is not in libraries. I'm only in library school because I started working in a library, and you need that MLIS if you want to move further on or to be a titled librarian. So my background is like children, and I have a master's in child advocacy and all that. So I knew nothing. So I'm reading a lot about the history of libraries. And like, as you mentioned, they started just by people being like, hey, my living room is big and I have a lot of books.
Yeah.
Come borrow them. And it's like, oh, okay. But I did not know, I guess I hadn't read that yet about how DC didn't want to have a public library since they have the Library of Congress. And in my own ignorance, the Library of Congress is the Library of Congress. So there's such, it's like, I can't speak anymore. It's much more accredited, and everyone wants to go see the Library of Congress, and that's what they want to visit, rather than like the DC Public Library.
Yeah, for a long time, the library, this is a very like different thing. And one thing I like to point out when I talk about the library to groups, and I have this slideshow that I do, and one of the pictures I use is this horse-drawn carriage of tourists in DC, and the background is the Capitol. And what I like about it is that on the tour company's logo when they're advertising when you're going around the city to get on this tour, the tour starts at the public library. And it's like, it's this place that you would go to, and looking at like old travel guides, it was a place people went. Like if you came to a city, you would go check out the public library to just see it, or a place that you could go and get the news or whatever you needed to do. You could do that at a public library. And that is interesting. It's something that's very changed in cities. Like no one goes on vacation other than librarians. No one goes to a city and goes and sees the library.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder when we transitioned out of that, because like, as you said, you could go to a library, get the newspaper for free, get local help, like, hey, what's a good place to visit? So I wonder when it transitioned from being like the place to go as soon as you got somewhere new to like, why would you go to the library if you're on vacation unless you're a librarian?
Yeah. I don't know when that transition happened. That, again, another interesting little paper there or something for someone to look at, and look at all sort of libraries. Like to say, I mean, Library of Congress is still a tourist destination. It doesn't really function like a public library does, but it's still a touristy kind of place. But yeah, no one other than librarians go and, are going to go to, Portland to see this brand new library that they built, or, the New York Public Library. Well, New York Public maybe has a little bit of touristy thing to it, but yeah, you're not gonna go check out those things.
I could definitely attest to that, because before I worked in a library, I would have never gone to a library on vacation. And now I'm like, oh, I want to go check out the local library, see what it looks like.
Yeah, and just pop in, and those of us that work in special collections or some local history aspect in a public library, that's usually what you're interested. You want to make a connection with somebody else in another city, because often we have things that we need that don't fit our scope. So the more people we connect to that are local history, we can send them to. So often you go to a conference, big city, you you'll make a connection and you'll be able to say, oh, I got these postcards. I've been trying to get rid of them. Can I just send them to you? You know, they fit your scope better than mine. So yeah, that often happens.
I had another question for you, just going back to what you said about working with a local history group. Thinking back on some of the papers that we've read in my archives classes, one of the things that they've talked about is just like from a, I guess, like purely archivist perspective, trying to explain to historians what it is that archivists do from like an archivist perspective. Do you feel like you have to engage in those kinds of conversations, or do you think that it's like maybe the other way around, like historians need to tell archivists what archivists are doing?
I think that goes a little bit both ways. I think you get that with, you know, a common thing with archivists is that I'm not an architect, I'm an archivist, and not the very different things. And we have to, we find ourselves having to explain to library administration, to other librarians, what an archives is and what an archive does. We had a transfer into our division from, she was a regular branch librarian, and she's my counterpart. So it's another what we call a coordinator. She handles the reference end. But she was just a regular librarian, transferred in, had a like of special collections and knew a little bit about it. But when she came, she said, I didn't know what you guys did here. You know, I had to do a lot of research on what you did, and now I understand it. And getting her to understand sort of like why we do certain things, and archivally speaking, you know, it has been a little bit of a challenge. With the historians, a lot of our historians know, because they've done enough research in other places that they understand what to do, and understand why we do it. And being a public library, we're a little more lenient than other archival places because of the public library's mission of free and open access and things. So we have to be a little bit more freer with our stuff than a lot of other archives. We've been taking baby steps in towards, you know, like where you have to register for an appointment, and you can only have one box at a time, and no, you cannot use the photocopier, and you know, you have to, you know, we've been taking little steps and little things away from our researchers over time, now, rather than trying to shock them with like how all archival function or security measures work. But we explain to them, you know, just why it is and what we do. Previous administrations in the library have been very oblivious to what we do. We had a fire in one of our libraries that houses a special collection, and thankfully the response was great. Like our division responded really well. We lost about 5 to 7% of the collection. Everything else was salvaged. And was able to be restored and everything. But when they redesigned the library, the administration was like, well, we need a space and we want it to be secure and we want independent air conditioning. It's just like, well, why do we need it? Why can't we just have the building? And so we had to explain all these things to her. And it didn't quite get all the way through because she put us in the attic of the building, or what was formerly the attic, which is the place that burnt. So we're like, you put us in the place that burnt. We wanted to be on the second level, right where we were. But so it took some time but the administration we're under now, our director came from the Brooklyn Public Library, and the Brooklyn Public Library has a very large local history and very active local history thing. So he was very knowledgeable as to what it is we do and what we can do. And he's really allowed us to like run with whatever we wanted, and has been very supportive. So we're able to develop a digital archive. We've been going and digitizing newspapers and trying to make our collections more accessible by doing that. We're expanding us from just 2 archivists to now 5, and we're advocating for another archivist to be added, another digital archivist to be added, because we're looking at, like, we wanted to have a service where people can come in with their cellulose film, so 8mm, 16mm film, and get it digitized. We have a service that the library started, and actually we piloted it out to other, one of the things he allowed us to do. And we call it the Memory Lab. And we've piloted this function out to libraries all over the country. So through an IMLS grant, I think it's an IMLS grant. Pretty sure it's an IMLS grant, but whatever. It's a leadership grant that allows us to like advocate and help other libraries set up these same systems. And that system allows people to take anything magnetic material, so VHS, beta, cassette tape, really a wide variety of magnetic material, and have it digitized for you. You have to sit there with it, and we allow the people to do it themselves. So we allow the people to do their own digitizing. But we were looking at like, well, we want to do film because not everyone can, afford to send their things off. And the only place in the city to do it for free is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. You can do that for free there. And we want to stop sending people there and be able to do it ourselves, just as another service. So that way we can expand our film collection too. We can start collecting in that medium that we've never collected in because we didn't have proper storage, nor could we do anything with it. And we knew, like any of those mediums, there's a time clock, and we need to get it to the next the medium that is currently being used, so that it can be available to a researcher or people that would want it. We know that there's a finite amount of time to do that with people that have stuff in their houses. And with 700,000 people living in the district, people have got to have stuff in their houses, and often I meet a lot of them. So.
Just James, do you want to ask your question yourself, or do you want?
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So yeah, I was curious. The recent renovation of the MLK main branch, if I'm not mistaken, I was curious if that offered any new sort of opportunities for your department, in the work you do, and I guess if there are any, challenges while it's undergoing. I'm not sure how much, that work, that renovation work affects your department, but I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah, so the renovation of Central Library was a very positive for our division. Prior to the renovation, we had a space that was adequate, I would say. I mean, it wasn't the greatest. We had very bad temperature problems. We had great humidity. Our humidity was always anywhere, 20 to 30%, which is great. That was building wide. Temperature, not so good. It ranged anywhere on, could be summer, winter, it didn't matter. It was always 75 to 85 degrees in the building. At one time, I recorded a temperature of 104 at my desk because being near the windows, and the photograph collections were right around me. So not ideal for any collections. The renovation of the building really allowed us to advocate to the library about, we have 450 archival collections, 2 million photographs. We need to be really good stewards of the things the people of the city have given us. And so we're going to renovate this library. So what can we get out of that? What do we need? So the library allowed us to double our space for dealing with the public. So our public side is twice as large as our other space was. And then we have a specific storage place for all the books in our collection that we have some in the reading room and some that are pageable. So we have a nice large space for that. We got a digitization suite, 4 independent processing rooms. We integrated with the exhibit people so that exhibits in the library could use a lot of our stuff, and those people could have hands-on access to all of the stuff that the library has. We got we got an independent storage room for archival stuff, which is on a different level, a different storage. So it has an independent air system that operates that room, and it stays about 10 degrees colder than the rest of the building. We got a secure vault out of the room. And we also advocated for what we call a dirty room, so that when you bring in a new collection, if it's contaminated with anything, you don't want to bring that in with all your other material. You want a place to like rebox it and go through it, do the accession process. So we have that room to do that in now. And eventually we're going to get a ventless hood, so that if we do get things that are moldy or dusty, or I've dealt with all kind of different things, as you go with collections. The last one was in an attic and a squirrel lived in it. So, squirrel nuts and all kind of, it was just a mess. But I was able, now I'd be able to do that in the building rather than having to take it outside, put my mask and suit up to deal with the stuff. I'd be able to now do it inside the building rather than have to do it outside. That'll make me very happy. But we were able to get all of that stuff out of the renovation. One thing the architects did is, if you ever have to go through a process like this in your career, be wary of like last minute changes that architects do to plans that they don't necessarily circle back to you on. So they shrank our storage space without telling us, and now we have a shelving problem. That we have to store with an offsite storage now. So we have a little bit of a problem. We were promised one set of thing and given another. And then they made some deals with outside agencies. So the Office of Historic Preservation, so the archaeologists for the District of Columbia, they can store all of their artifacts in our storage facility. The library made that deal without consent of us. So we lost about 10% of our storage space that now has to go over to that office. So an interesting thing. And we made a deal with the district is, I guess there's money tied to that. So I guess they couldn't really say no, but the district wants to start a museum dedicated to go-go music, which is a native DC music style. It was created in DC, and they want to create a museum. So they also offered storage space for the artifacts that they collect, again, in our storage facility. And so it's been a challenge to deal with some of these outside things. And when you think you have tons of room, or because we asked for double the amount of storage space we have, and they gave what ends up being is they gave us 25% more than what we had previously. So it worked out a little differently. And then the architects necessarily don't think like librarians. So when they measure linear feet, you tell them that you want, X number of linear feet. They measure the entire shelf, but no librarian does that. They leave room for growth. So they don't use a third of the shelf, or, a quarter or something like that. And we've been shelving books and realized that, oh, we don't have enough room to do that and grow the collection at the same time. So it's been an interesting challenge to look at some of the changes that were done post sort of starting the whole process. We did have a voice in the say-so, so we were able to input what we needed, and we did get a lot of the things we asked for. We didn't get everything. I would say it's a success story, but more than a failure. But it was a very valuable lesson, that's for sure. I hope none of you ever have to live through it, though.
If I can chime in with one more question, just to kind of bring it back to the information professions angle of this. What are some, I don't quite know how to phrase this, skills or emerging areas or things that I guess I'm thinking in terms of we're all doing coursework right now, but also what are things that are workshops that are worth doing, or just areas that are worth looking into, skills that you need to have to be an archivist right now that would be helpful in terms of just training.
Yeah.
That was vague. I'm sorry, but
Yeah, that it is. That's okay. That's okay. Outside of just general, like, do a practicum if you can, do an internship, even if they're free, if you can, just to gain some of that experience. Any archive you go to is going to train you how they want to do or how they do things. They're going to have a manual that's different. They're going to have terminology that's different. And look at it more like an apprentice. Ask tons of questions. Don't be afraid to ask tons of questions of anybody. You can do that. One of the things I think is often overlooked is, especially working in a public library, you really need good people skills, because you are dealing with the public and not like the scholarly researchers. In public library, we get everybody. So we get the guy who thinks he's the king of Saudi Arabia coming in to help us prove that he's not a king, he's a prince. He was abandoned in DC, and he wants to try and prove that he's a Saudi prince, and we help him with newspaper searches. And so you have to just accept that their question is based in reality and help them, and not sort of, just pass them off and stuff. So, when dealing with the homeless population that frequent our library, they use our resources. They're welcome to use our resources. So people skills are something. I spent a lot of time. I'm a late college person, so I graduated high school, then I should have taken years off, but I didn't. I stayed in college way too long, doing and not going to college, but that's a whole different story. But during that time, I worked in restaurants, and I think working in the service industry really, really sharpened those people skills that I needed. And it's just great with customer service to just be able to meet people where they are and not talk down to them, not think that their question is silly, or they ask a question or you roll your eyes at them or whatever. Just trying to not voice any of those things in a public setting. You can do it all in the back of the house. You can go back and complain to your coworkers all you want. Just trying to not do it in front of people. I've seen all gamuts of things in working in the library, and the way people handle things. My first supervisor didn't like people sleeping, and I don't know how, she could never do this now. No one could ever do this now. She had an air horn and would walk by and go beep with an air horn to wake them up. And I'm like, there is no way anyone could do that now. It was totally awesome, but now you have to be polite, to explain to them, oh, you can't sleep in the library. You have to do it very all politely. She just never thought of that. So I've seen, you see all kind of different things, that's for sure. And those people skills are great. And being a certified archivist, that end, and having to maintain your certification and taking courses, 70% of your certification is just staying gainfully employed, but attending conferences and listening to other people and looking at different things and cherry picking out what other people do, because you're going to have to do things like like when I started, we didn't have a deed of gift, or well, we did, but it didn't really have any legal aspect to it. So we had to rewrite a deed of gift. We didn't have a processing manual, so we had to write a processing manual. And it's great to go out there and talk to other people about these things and really look at the functionality of how that's all done, and trying to really make it sort of real world rather than that book world that you're all learning now. Try to make it more practical for what you're going to do. My processing manual's got all kind of screenshots in it, like this is where you log into archive space, and this is where you enter, this is where you search. So it's making it very simple. Don't be afraid of new things and exploring. I mean, I've never been afraid of doing that, but I really like learning and looking at what other people are doing, and knowing that there's always a better way to do it, and it can't be the best way to do it. The fire at the library really got me involved in disaster preparedness, and that has just been very interesting to me, of like how people preserve stuff. I would have thought, you think, oh, fire, going to lose everything, but really talking with them and having them work with them through our recovery process has really taught me that, like, basic preservation things and keeping things in boxes and not on the floor and stuff really, really does help. Because, the boxes all did their function properly. They got destroyed and the items inside were fine. But don't be afraid. I always say, just don't be afraid to ask those questions and explore and be humble enough to know that there's always a different way to do it, and somebody else might have a better way of doing it. And you can always steal pieces of their ideas to make it work for you and your collection.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's okay to jump in.
Sure.
All right. So I'm looking at the website trying to get a kind of idea of the scope of your collections.
Oh, don't look at our website. It's terrible.
Okay, I can help you with that. I come from a history background also, so this is all for me as well. So I'm looking at the website, looking at the scope of the collections, and I'm wondering if we're kind of chunk it out into like what's permanent, what's on deposit, what's a grant project. I'm familiar actually with Memory Lab. I sat in on one of your webinars a while back because I was thinking of doing something similar for my genealogical society. So I was kind of seeing how you guys set that up. And even the Veterans History Project, like, is that a funded project? Is it ongoing? Is it permanent?
The Veterans Oral History is the Library of Congress project. So
okay, so on your website. I didn't know if that was the same thing.
we may have partnered with them in some way.
Yeah, that's probably
there is a group in the city that is actively collecting oral histories. We're the repository. We don't offer any expertise on collecting oral histories because we don't have an oral historian that can advocate for that. Our collections, I say that they tend to be organizational based and activist driven. So they're not like, we don't have a lot of personal family papers. So we have individual papers, but it's all about their activism in the city. And they can be, most of the collections are very local, but some of them have very national influence. So a man named Damu Smith was very involved with Greenpeace and the founding and the early days of Greenpeace. Another man, Julius Hobson, is a local political figure in DC, but he helped found the Statehood Party, which has now turned into the Green Party. And he was the vice presidential candidate under the first Green Party ticket. So they tend to do that, but all their papers are they sort of lack that personal end. It's really all about their activist thing. The Historical Society of the city does a much better job at collecting the personal end. And they have those letters, those family letters, those family diaries, those things that you also think of as archives. They have a lot more there. That's their bread and butter collecting. There's a bunch. I mean, we have a lot of competition in the city with collecting, so we all sort of carve out our own niches, and so organizations tend to come to us. Lately, we've been collecting in music, so go-go, of course, and we've predating go-go collecting. We started a punk archive and collecting in punk in the city. Our punk archive is substantially much larger than the go-go one right now. So it's expanded what we normally collect. We've tried to go after local people, so looking at different things. So we brought in an artist who was also a teacher. So not necessarily looking at their art, but it was sort of, we have all our records from teaching, and then we have all the stuff about how she put together all of her shows. And then we have some sketches and stuff, but she sold all of her artwork. So there's no real like art in the collection, but it's really drawings or photographs that she took and how she pieced the pieces together. So it allowed for some different types of collecting. But
And
still
are you approaching people, or are you actively outreaching to different groups? And
yeah, we actively go after a lot of people. We have a couple people in the city that are that advocate very well for us, and they'll facilitate the introduction. And then there's a sometimes long courtship dance with them till they finally pass over whatever they have. I've gotten leads that are now 5 years old that I've talked with them. They're like, oh yeah, we should do that. And, I'll get things together. And then I never hear back from them. But I get other people from there that do that, or that hear about us from different channels. But we try to get out as much as we can and talk to people about, this is a place that you can do this, and talk to organizations specifically, because there are a lot of them in the city, and we can really go after them. And so we've been trying to go after some of those super collectors that collect a specific thing. So postcards, or I don't know, some sort of ephemeral item that might there. We've been trying to go after some of them so that we can represent some other things where we know we have holes in our collection. We've been really going after. We did a big analysis of all of our archival collections to figure out, okay, we're really strong here. We don't really need anything else in statehood. We're going to always, in home rule, we're going to always get that, because a lot of people have that and want that. We're not so strong in second language materials. So anything in Spanish or Chinese or any other language. We don't have a lot of things written in another language. So we've been advocating to try and go out and get some of those materials. We're in negotiations with the Chinese language newspaper right now. I'll never be able to tell you what it says, but we can at least collect it. And we've been looking at like the GLBT community and how we can work there. We've signed a deal with several newspapers there. We've digitized a lot of that content, which has led to some people thinking about donating collections from there, where they see that we've been doing this work. And we try to get out there. I mean, I seem to go to conferences and everyone knows sort of things we're doing. So it's getting out in the archival world, in the library world, what we're doing. I just need it to be in the public world. And we have a reporter that really is a great advocate for us, that he writes a local history kind of column in the Washington Post. And he's been very great for us and advocating and talking to people that he talks to, because he's writing always these really unique stories, and these people that have unique things, and talking to them about, oh, you should, think about not holding on to those 10,000 photographs you have in your basement. You should possibly think about an archive for that, And I go and talk to them, and people don't, know what they have. I've talked with so many different people. And one lady that had a series of diaries that she initially contacted me about was a series of diaries from her great aunt, lived in the district, and she wrote a daily diary. Sometimes it was just like, this is the price of milk. Other days it's like different things. And she made very intentional things. So like the day Martin Luther King died, she was writing one entry. She switched the color of her pen to red, and then wrote a whole thing about Dr. King in there, and then switched back to a blue pen, which I thought was very weird, but it shows some thought pattern about, she wanted this to stand out. So she understood the value of those, but then she said, oh, I have these other things. And what the other things were letters she had a whole series of letters from a man who traveled around the world as a merchant marine. She's like, these aren't very interesting. They're not thing here. So I sort of explained to her, like, all these things have value. She had letters from a cousin in New York City that had ticket stubs in them from a jazz club she went to. And I'm like, I said, those things are valuable to somebody. and you should really like think about it. We would love all the collection. It doesn't, if it doesn't come to us, you should really think about it. She ended up giving them to Harvard, is where they ended up going, but and so it allowed, but it allowed her to the education of like what is valuable to her. So.
And it also looks like you guys are the repository for the vital records as well, right? For the district?
No, that's the city archive.
Okay.
The DC archives is the vital records.
I mean, I meant
the city.
the archival vital, like it's got the deaths and birth and marriages from
Yeah, we have
1800s and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we have copies of all of those. So everything we
Okay.
have vital record or building permit is all different different repositories have that. So the DC archives does all of the main vital records. So birth, death, marriage are all the city archive. The National Archive, because the district was controlled by the federal government for such a long period of time, has a lot of the city records as well. They have like the police department and the courts, and they have the building permits. And so we have copies of those things from those repositories, and we make them available to our researchers, because getting into a lot of those archives is more difficult for them. Public library, just walk in.
I think we're ready to start wrapping it up. Mark, I wanted to thank you for your time, for talking to us. If you could just drop us what best contact info for you would be. Usually when we send out the video, or we post a video, or Christy can talk a little about it, we include some contact info for students if they can reach out to you, or what would be the best way. If you have, I guess, your LinkedIn, you could drop it in the chat too. Whichever you prefer. But thank you for joining us today. We really appreciated it. I learned so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, I did too. It's always a lot of fun, and I'm available. I'll give you my contact. You can always, you've got questions, feel free to contact me and ask away. I'm available with that. I can even, I'll give my phone number and stuff. You can call and chat with me if you have additional questions or want to look in the area. We're gonna have a position posting hopefully with a digital archivist sometime soon. The library is hiring regular librarians right now. So if you're graduating and want to look at I just saw today that they had a position opening for a regular librarian. So in the system, if you want to come to DC or are from the DC area and want to return home. Yeah, I'll provide all that for you, and happy to do so.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna